They said, "You don't need to come to Christmas, Mom. We'll celebrate without you." Those were the words that shattered me. Do you know what it feels like to be erased from the very table you built? To be told by your own children, the ones you carried, the ones you sacrificed for, that your presence is not only unwanted, but unnecessary. I sat there with the phone pressed to my ear, listening to the silence after their words. My hands trembled, my chest ached, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. I wasn't just left out of a holiday. I was being told that I no longer belonged in my own family. All the memories came rushing back. Late nights when I stayed awake to sew costumes for school plays, mornings I walked in the rain so they could ride the bus in a dry coat, dinners I skipped so they could eat seconds, every sacrifice, every act of love, every unspoken prayer, swept aside in a single sentence, "We'll celebrate without you." But I am not just a mother. I am a woman who has lived, who has endured, and who still carries a voice. And this is the story of how those words broke me and how I found my strength. I had always believed that Christmas was the one thread that kept us all tied together. No matter how far my children wandered, no matter how busy their lives became, there was always that one day, that one call, that one invitation that reminded me I was still part of something. Every year, like clockwork, I would wait by the phone. Sometimes it came early, in November, with excitement in their voices. "Mom, start packing. We can't wait to see you." Sometimes it came later, rushed and hurried, but still filled with a sense of duty. "Mom, of course you're coming. We'll set a place for you." But this year, the silence stretched on. I remember looking at the calendar in the kitchen, December 1st, then the 5th, then the 10th. The pages flipped forward, but my phone remained still, lying quiet on the counter as if it too had forgotten me. Each day I told myself, "They're just busy. They'll call tomorrow." Tomorrow became a week became 2, and still nothing. On the 15th of December, I made tea and sat near the window, watching children across the street decorate their front lawn. I could hear their laughter, the way they shouted when the lights finally flickered on. The sound pierced me, because in my heart I was waiting for my own laughter, the voices of my grandchildren asking, "Grandma, are you coming for Christmas? Will you bring cookies?" But my phone remained silent, and so I waited. I folded laundry more slowly, my ears straining for the sound of a ring. I carried the phone into every room, afraid I might miss the call if I stepped away. I even kept it near my bed, the glow of the screen, the last thing I saw each night before closing my eyes. But it never lit up. I began to feel something I had never allowed myself to feel before: doubt. Then one afternoon, as I walked into the kitchen, I heard voices. At first, I thought I was imagining it, perhaps the neighbors outside. But no, it was the familiar sound of my daughter's voice, muffled but clear, coming from the speakerphone. She had called her brother, and she hadn't realized I was in the hallway. I froze. Her words floated across the room like knives. "So, we're agreed then? We won't invite her this year. It's too much. It's awkward. She just doesn't fit anymore." I pressed my back against the wall, the kettle still whistling behind me, forgotten. My son's voice came next, low and hesitant. "Yeah, I think it's best. She can just stay home. We'll celebrate without her." My heart stopped. For a moment, I thought perhaps I had misunderstood. Perhaps they were speaking of someone else, a distant relative, a neighbor, anyone but me. But then my daughter's voice cut through any doubt. "She'll understand. She's old. She doesn't need all the noise. We'll call her after, maybe send pictures. It'll be fine." It'll be fine. I felt my chest tighten as though the air itself had turned against me. They weren't just forgetting to invite me. They weren't too busy or distracted or stressed. They had chosen to erase me. Do you know what it feels like to overhear your own children making plans for joy and deciding that joy does not include you? I stood there, my hands trembling, listening to their voices, voices I had once soothed to sleep, voices I had once defended against the world. Now those same voices were closing the door on me. The words echoed again and again in my head. We'll celebrate without her. I leaned against the wall to keep from falling. In that moment, I realized something painful. I was no longer their mother in their eyes. I was an afterthought, a burden, an inconvenience to be managed with polite excuses and delayed phone calls. I whispered to myself, barely breathing. I felt like a guest in my own family. The rest of the day blurred. I moved like a shadow through my own home, folding blankets, washing dishes, anything to keep my hands busy, while my mind replayed the betrayal. Every corner of the house reminded me of the years I had built them up, the stockings I had once stitched by hand, the ornaments I had collected, each carrying a story, the photo albums stacked high on the shelf, filled with faces that now refused to see me. I opened one album and traced my fingers over a picture. My son, at 10 years old, holding a new bicycle with a grin stretched from ear to ear. That bicycle had come from nights of extra shifts, aching legs, swollen feet. I had worked quietly, without complaint, because his happiness mattered more than my exhaustion. And yet, years later, he could say, without hesitation, "She doesn't need to come." I closed the album. My hands shook. The nights grew colder as Christmas drew nearer. Houses lit up around me with glowing wreaths, candy canes on the lawn, windows glowing warm with gatherings. But my house sat quiet, the only light coming from the small lamp by my armchair. I sat there night after night, staring at the phone. Part of me still hoped that maybe they would change their minds, that maybe I would hear the words I long for. "Mom, what are you talking about? Of course you're coming. We need you here." But the call never came. Instead, I had the cruel memory of the call I wasn't meant to hear. And in that silence, in that absence, something inside me began to change. I will not pretend it was courage right away. No. At first, it was only pain, a deep, hollow pain that made me question who I was, what I meant, and whether my years of love had been worth anything at all. But slowly, as the days ticked closer to Christmas, that pain began to shift. It hardened. It became resolve. If they wanted to celebrate without me, then I would find a way to remind them who I was, not with anger, not with screaming or fighting, but with the quiet, undeniable truth that a mother is never invisible, because a mother's place at the table is not something to be granted or denied. It is something that has already been earned, with blood, sweat, tears, and endless nights of sacrifice. And that is when the seed of my plan began to take root. That was the Christmas when the invitation never came, the year my own children decided to erase me, the year I realized that silence could be as sharp as betrayal. But it was also the year I began to rise. Because if they wanted me to stay home, waiting by the phone like a forgotten guest, they were about to discover that I was still their mother. And I was not finished. I remember the exact moment they told me. It wasn't something overheard this time. It wasn't whispers behind my back or plans made when they thought I wasn't listening. No, this time it was spoken directly to me. Words, deliberate and heavy, carried through the line of a phone I had once longed to hear, ring with joy. It was a Tuesday evening, 1 week before Christmas. The sky outside my window had already fallen dark. the street lamps flickering against the snow. I sat in my armchair, the blanket pulled over my lap, the phone warm in my hand as I waited for the call to end in laughter. I thought it would be an invitation, the invitation I had been aching for. I pressed the phone to my ear, heart racing, waiting for the words I had always known. "Mom, when are you coming? We saved you a seat." But instead, I heard my daughter's voice say something else entirely. "Mom, listen, this year we think it's better if you don't come." I blinked, certain I had misheard. Better if I don't come? What could that mean? My lips parted, but no sound came out. She continued, her tone wrapped in fake sweetness, the kind people use when they are trying to hide something ugly. "It's just, you know how chaotic it gets. The kids are running everywhere. The house is full and, well, we think it might be too much for you." Too much for me. I felt my throat tighten. The words didn't sound like care. They sounded like dismissal dressed up in politeness. Then my son's voice cut in from the background, not even speaking to me directly, but loud enough that I could hear him. "Yeah, Mom, it's fine. Just stay home this year. We'll celebrate without you." And that was it. The sentence landed like a blow. "We'll celebrate without you." The silence that followed was deafening. The line was still open, but none of us spoke. I sat frozen, the phone pressed so hard to my ear it hurt, my chest rising and falling as though I had run a mile. I could hear the faint background noise of their house, children laughing in another room, the clatter of dishes in the kitchen, the easy comfort of a home preparing for joy. But I wasn't part of that joy. I wasn't part of anything anymore. My daughter cleared her throat, her voice faltering, as if she knew how cruel the moment was. "You understand, don't you, Mom? It's not personal. It's just simpler this way." Simpler. I wanted to scream. Since when did a mother become a complication? Since when did the woman who gave life, who worked until her body ached, who stitched every Christmas stocking by hand, become an obstacle to be managed instead of a guest to be cherished? But no words came. Instead, I sat there in silence. Because silence was all I had. I could feel the heat in my chest turning to something cold. The sound of their voices blended into a distant echo, like a cruel lullaby, reminding me of everything I no longer had. "Stay home this year. We'll celebrate without you. It's simpler this way." Over and over the phrases replayed until I thought my heart might split in two. I managed to whisper into the phone, though my voice barely carried, "I see, I understand." But the truth was, I didn't understand. Not at all. The call ended quickly after that. My daughter said something about calling me on Christmas Day, about sending me pictures so I wouldn't feel left out. She said it as though pictures could replace presents, as though photographs could fill the silence of an empty home. When the line went dead, I lowered the phone into my lap. My fingers were stiff, my knuckles white from gripping it too hard. The room around me was quiet, too quiet. The ticking of the clock on the wall sounded louder than it ever had before, each second mocking me. I leaned back into my chair, closed my eyes, and let the words replay once more. "We'll celebrate without you." That was when it hit me, the sharp truth I could no longer ignore. It was as if Christmas no longer had a place for me. I thought back to the decades of Christmases past, the years when my house was filled with the smell of cinnamon and roasted turkey, when stockings hung on the fireplace, when wrapping paper littered the floor, as children laughed and squealed with joy. I remembered staying up past midnight, wrapping gifts I could barely afford, whispering prayers that my children would never feel the kind of lack I had known as a girl. I remembered waiting by the oven, basting turkeys, rolling out pie crusts, setting the table with care. Because Christmas wasn't just a holiday, it was proof of love, proof that family meant something, and now, suddenly, it meant nothing. With one phone call, with one careless sentence, the years of memories, of sacrifice, of tradition were erased. I felt like a stranger, standing outside a window, watching a family gathered inside, my family, but unable to open the door. I felt invisible, worse than invisible. I felt unwanted. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the weight of the blanket pressing down on me like a burden I couldn't shake. Every creak of the house reminded me how alone I was. Every shadow in the corner reminded me of the emptiness waiting on Christmas morning. My chest ached as though the words themselves had carved a hollow inside me. I whispered into the darkness, the same way I once whispered bedtime prayers over my children when they were young. Lord, how did I become unwanted in the very home I built? How did I lose my place at the table I made with my own hands? But no answer came, only silence. The same silence I had felt on the phone when my children told me I wasn't needed. In the days that followed, I moved like a ghost through my house. I cooked smaller meals because who was there to feed? I dusted shelves and swept floors, not because it mattered, but because I needed to fill the hours. The decorations I once loved stayed packed away. What was the point of stringing lights if no one would see them? What was the point of trimming a tree if no grandchildren would gasp at the sparkle? I left the boxes closed. Instead, I sat in my armchair with the phone beside me, staring at it as though I could will it to ring again. Ring with an apology, ring with a correction, ring with love. But it never rang, and so Christmas grew nearer. But for me, it felt like Christmas had already ended. It was no longer a season of joy, no longer a promise of togetherness. It was a reminder of distance, of rejection, of a family I had once belonged to but no longer did. And every time I thought of their words, the pain returned, sharper and deeper. Stay home this year. We'll celebrate without you. It was more than exclusion. It was erasure. It was a declaration that my place, my worth, my love no longer mattered. And that realization broke me in a way I had never been broken before. But even as I sat in that brokenness, even as the silence of my house weighed heavier each night, something began to stir within me. Not anger, not yet. Not revenge, not yet. Just a faint, trembling truth that whispered beneath the pain. If they could erase me so easily, then perhaps it was time they remembered who I truly was. And that thought, fragile at first, began to grow, because broken hearts, I would soon learn, can still beat with strength, and mine was not finished yet. I sat in my chair for days, the silence of the house wrapping itself around me like a heavy, unwelcome blanket. Their words still echoed in my ears, refusing to fade. Stay home this year. We'll celebrate without you. They didn't just pierce my heart once. No, they lived inside me, replaying over and over, each time cutting a little deeper. But as the hours turned into days, something began to shift inside of me. The tears slowed. The ache in my chest settled into something else, something harder, something colder. I found myself looking back over the years I had given, the years I had carried them when no one else would. I remembered the nights I walked home from late shifts, my uniform stiff with grease from the diner, my feet aching so badly that every step felt like walking on broken glass. I would come home with just enough energy to kick off my shoes, collapse into bed for a few hours of sleep, and then wake up to make them breakfast before school. I remembered how, when they were small, I went without coats so they could have new ones. How I quietly ate smaller portions at dinner so their plates would look full. I remembered staying up all night sewing costumes, patching clothes, saving pennies in jars, just to make sure that when Christmas came, there would be something, anything, waiting under the tree. I gave them everything, And now I was told I was too much, too inconvenient, too invisible. That realization burned inside me. It didn't burn like anger. It burned like truth, and truth has a way of waking a woman up. I began to see clearly what I hadn't wanted to admit before. My children had forgotten. They had forgotten who I was, what I had done, the sacrifices that had shaped their lives. They thought I was weak. They thought I was old. They thought they could push me into the shadows, erase me quietly, and I would simply accept it. But they had forgotten one thing. I was still their mother, and mothers do not disappear. That was the night I whispered to myself, not in bitterness, but in resolve. If they wanted me invisible, I would show them the truth. So I began to plan, not loudly, not with threats or arguments. No, my plan was quiet, careful, measured. I started by going to the closet where I kept the old holiday boxes. For years I had saved them, ornaments from their childhood, stockings with their names stitched in crooked letters, decorations they had made with glue and glitter when their hands were still small. One by one, I opened the boxes. Dust rose into the air, the smell of time and memory filling the room. I pulled out each item and laid them on the table. The paper angel my daughter made in kindergarten, the snowflake cutouts my son once hung in the window, the stockings, worn, frayed, but still carrying the names I had stitched. I touched each one, remembering the moments they came from, feeling the weight of love in my hands. And as I looked at them, I realized these things were not just decorations. They were proof of the years I had given, proof of the memories I had built, proof of the love that had shaped every Christmas, proof that I belonged. The next step of my plan was simple. I began to pack, not in a rush, not with anger. Slowly, methodically, I folded clothes into a suitcase. I chose carefully. A warm coat, a scarf, gifts I had bought months earlier and hidden away in the back of my dresser. I wrapped them in tissue paper, placed them in the bag. Each item I packed was like a declaration. I am coming. I have a place. I will not be erased. I did not call them. I did not tell them, because this was not about asking permission. This was about reclaiming what was already mine. As I packed, I thought about the years they were small, when they couldn't imagine a Christmas without me. Back then, I was the one who made it all happen, the food, the gifts, the warmth, the laughter, but now they had convinced themselves that I was unnecessary. I smiled to myself as I zipped the suitcase. They had no idea what was coming, but it wasn't just about showing up. No, it was more than that. It was about dignity. I knew I couldn't storm in angry. Anger would make them dismiss me. Anger would make them roll their eyes, tell themselves I was proving their point. No, I would walk in with grace, with silence, with presence so strong it didn't need shouting, because sometimes revenge isn't about raising your voice. Sometimes it's about simply standing where they thought you would never stand, and letting the weight of your presence speak louder than any words ever could. For days, I prepared quietly. I made cookies, the same recipe my mother had once passed to me, the same cookies I used to bake with my children when their hands were small and sticky with sugar. I packed them carefully into tins. I ironed the dress I had saved for special occasions, the one I hadn't worn in years but always kept in the back of my closet. I polished my shoes until they shone. Every detail mattered because this wasn't just a visit. It was a statement. At night, as I lay in bed, I thought about what I would say when I arrived. Would I scold them? No. Would I beg them? No. I decided I would not say much at all, because sometimes silence carries more weight than words, but I also knew that when the time came, when the moment arrived, I would find the strength to speak the truth, not in anger, not in bitterness, but in dignity. And that truth would remind them that I was not invisible. That truth would remind them who I was. As Christmas Eve drew closer, my heart grew steadier. The sadness I had once felt began to harden into something like steel. I was not going to sit at home and cry. I was not going to let myself be erased. I was going to show up, not as a burden, not as an afterthought, but as the woman who had built the very foundation they stood on. And when they saw me standing there, when they realized that their attempt to silence me had failed, they would know. They would know the truth I had carried all along, that no matter how much they tried to deny me, no matter how much they tried to push me into the shadows, I was and would always be their mother. And that is a role you cannot erase. So as I closed the suitcase and placed it by the door, I felt a calm I hadn't felt in weeks. The tears had dried. The fear had passed. All that remained was resolve. I whispered again to myself, firm and steady this time. If they wanted me invisible, I would show them the truth. And with that, my plan was set. The night before Christmas has always carried its own kind of magic. When my children were young, it was the night of whispers and wide eyes, of little feet rushing to bed with giggles, too excited to sleep. It was the night of stockings hung carefully on the fireplace, the scent of cinnamon and pine filling the air, the soft glow of lights making everything look golden. But this year, the house was silent. No little feet, no laughter, no stockings. Just me, my suitcase, and the heavy weight of memory pressing against my chest. I had packed carefully in the days before, but on that night, I opened the suitcase again. Not because I needed to, but because I needed to feel it, to remind myself that what I was about to do was real. Inside were the gifts I had chosen, each one wrapped in simple paper, tied with ribbon. I had bought them months ago, long before I knew I would be unwanted. A scarf for my daughter, a book for my son, toys for the grandchildren. As I touched each package, I felt both the ache of love and the sting of betrayal. These gifts weren't just objects. They were reminders of who I was, a giver, a mother, a presence that had always been there. I folded my dress again, the one I had chosen for this moment. Not fancy, not new, but dignified. A deep blue dress with soft fabric, one that made me feel strong. I smoothed my hands over it, remembering the times I had worn it before. Weddings, graduations, moments of pride, and now it would become something else, a declaration, not of celebration, not of joy, but of respect. Because that night, as I stared at my packed suitcase, I whispered to myself, I wasn't going for food, gifts, or lights. I was going for respect. The memories came rushing in then, so strong I had to sit down. I remembered the very first Christmas I had as a mother, when money was so tight I thought there would be nothing under the tree. I had stayed up all night, sewing a stuffed rabbit from scraps of fabric, my fingers raw, my eyes burning from lack of sleep. But when my daughter unwrapped it that morning, her smile made every moment worth it. I remembered another year, when the power went out and the whole house was dark. I lit candles, pulled blankets close, and told stories by the fire until the children drifted to sleep. They woke the next morning still smiling, never realizing how scared I had been that night. Scared they would be disappointed, scared they would think their Christmas was ruined. And yet, I had made it beautiful. Year after year, I found a way. Even when I had nothing, I gave them everything. And now they had decided that I was nothing. The thought cut me, sharp and cold, but it also strengthened me, because if they could forget so easily, then I would remind them. I walked through the house slowly, touching objects as though they were pieces of my own history. The kitchen, where I had cooked meal after meal, sometimes with joy, sometimes with exhaustion, but always with love. The living room, where the tree had once stood tall, surrounded by laughter and torn wrapping paper. The hallway, where I had hung their stockings each year, even long after they were grown, even when they rolled their eyes and said, "Mom, we're too old for this." I had kept traditions alive, even when they no longer cared. And now I realized those traditions weren't just for them. They were for me. They were proof of who I was, proof that I had always been there, and tomorrow I would be there again, whether they wanted me or not. The hours crept by slowly that night. I made tea, but barely drank it. I sat in my chair, but couldn't rest. My heart was heavy, but my resolve was stronger. Every sound in the quiet house seemed louder than usual. The ticking of the clock, the creak of the floorboards, the wind against the window. I looked at the clock again and again, watching the hands move, waiting for the night to pass. And as I waited, I thought about what tomorrow might bring. Would they be angry when they saw me? Embarrassed? Would they whisper again, right in front of me this time? Perhaps. But I didn't care. Because tomorrow wasn't about their comfort. It was about my dignity. It was about reminding them and reminding myself that I was still here, that I mattered, that no one could erase me from my own family. I pulled the suitcase closer to the door, the handle ready, the gifts neatly packed, the dress folded carefully inside. I sat back down in my chair and closed my eyes, whispering into the quiet, "Tomorrow, I will stand where they thought I would never stand. Tomorrow, they will see me. Tomorrow, I will show them the truth." I didn't sleep much that night. How could I? My mind was too full. I replayed the years, the sacrifices, the love that had filled my life as a mother. I thought of every Christmas I had carried on my back, every joy I had created out of nothing, every smile I had worked so hard to put on their faces. And now the time had come for me to create one more memory, not for them, for me. Because this Christmas would not be about food or gifts or lights. This Christmas would be about reclaiming what was mine. This Christmas would be about respect. And as the night faded into the first pale light of morning, I was ready to walk into the place they thought I no longer belonged, ready to stand tall in the silence of their shock, ready to remind them that a mother does not fade quietly into the shadows. A mother does not disappear. And this mother, me, was not finished yet. The drive felt longer than it really was. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles pale, heart pounding, as though I was carrying not just a suitcase, but the weight of years, of sacrifices, of unspoken love, of silent disappointments. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw the glow of lights spilling from the windows. Their cars were already parked neatly along the curb, a sign that everyone had gathered, everyone except me, the one they had decided to erase. For a moment, I sat there in the car, staring at the house I had once considered the very center of my life. The house where my son lived now, where I had been told I had no place this Christmas. My breath trembled, but I whispered to myself, "You are not here for food. You are not here for gifts. You are here for respect." And with that, I opened the door, lifted the suitcase, and walked forward. The path to the door was short, but with each step, it felt like a journey across years of silence and swallowed pain. My feet crunched softly against the frozen ground, my suitcase wheels rattling on the uneven stones of the walkway. I reached the porch and paused. My hand hovered over the door. My heart begged me to turn back, but my soul, oh my soul, pushed me forward. I turned the handle, and then I stepped inside. The warmth of the house hit me first, the smell of roasted turkey, the faint sweetness of pies cooling on the counter, the laughter that floated like music down the hallway. And then I saw them. They were all gathered around the table, their plates full, glasses raised, voices weaving together in a chorus of chatter, until they saw me. That's when the world stopped. They froze, forks in midair, like ghosts had entered the room. The laughter died instantly. Every head turned, every face drained of color. I stood in the doorway, holding my suitcase in one hand, my chin lifted, my eyes steady. For the first time in years, they had no words. The silence was heavy, so heavy I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. My daughter-in-law's hand trembled as she slowly set her glass down. My son, the one who had told me I wasn't needed, stared at me as if I were a stranger who had walked uninvited into his life. The grandchildren, confused, looked from face to face, sensing something was wrong, but too young to understand. And me? I stood there like a storm breaking into their calm, carrying nothing but my dignity. No one moved at first. No one spoke. I could see the thoughts flicker across their faces, shock, embarrassment, maybe even guilt. But none of them dared to stand, to welcome me, to acknowledge me. So I broke the silence. I set my suitcase gently against the wall, smoothed the skirt of my dress, and walked forward with steady steps. I could feel their eyes follow me, every breath held, every heartbeat echoing in the room. When I reached the table, I looked at each of them, one by one, and said quietly, "Don't stop eating on my account." The words cracked through the air like thunder. Some of them shifted uncomfortably, some lowered their eyes, but not one of them picked up their fork. I took my seat, the seat I had always occupied at every Christmas past, at the very edge of the table. No one offered it to me. I claimed it, because it was mine, because I had earned it through years of sacrifice, of showing up, of being the glue that held this family together. And as I sat there, I could feel their unease growing thicker by the second. I thought of all the meals I had served them over the years. How many times had I set the table, refilled their glasses, carved the turkey while they laughed and ate? And now, here I was, not serving, but standing, not giving, but demanding, not asking for permission, but taking what was mine. My son finally cleared his throat, his voice stiff. "Mom, we didn't think you'd—" I raised my hand gently, stopping him. "No," I said, "you didn't think. That was the problem." His mouth closed, the words trapped behind lips that had so easily dismissed me days before. The silence returned, but it was no longer the silence of shock. It was the silence of truth. They knew why I was there. They knew what I was showing them, and they couldn't deny it. I looked around the table, at the food, at the decorations, at the people who had once been my entire world, and I felt the strangest thing. Not anger, not even sorrow, but power. Because I had walked into the room they had tried to keep me out of. I had stood in the silence of their judgment and not wavered. I had shown them that I was not invisible, not forgotten, not erased. I leaned back in my chair, folded my hands in my lap, and let the moment linger. The gifts in my suitcase remained untouched. The food on the table remained uneaten, and still I had given them something greater than any present I could have wrapped. I had given them the truth, that I was here, that I mattered, that respect was not optional, it was owed. As the tension filled the room like smoke, I whispered inside my heart, "This is not about Christmas anymore. This is about dignity." And for the first time in a long time, I felt it. Dignity, sitting beside me like an honored guest at the table. I didn't need their invitation because my presence was the invitation. The room was heavy with silence. I had walked in, taken my seat, and now, nothing. No words, no movements, just the sound of breathing and the faint tick of the clock on the wall. They were all looking at me, or rather, looking around me, anywhere but into my eyes. My son, the one who had called me days before, the one who had told me so easily, "You don't need to come, Mom. We'll celebrate without you," kept his gaze fixed on his plate. His fork hovered midair, but he never brought it back down. His lips tightened, his shoulders stiffened. He couldn't look at me. The daughter-in-law, sitting beside him, lowered her head so quickly, I thought she might disappear into the tablecloth. Her fingers toyed with the napkin in her lap, twisting and untwisting the fabric as though she could squeeze her shame into silence. And the grandchildren, innocent eyes, wide and confused, stared from me to their parents, unsure why the room had turned so cold. But no one spoke, not a single word. And that silence was everything. In that silence, I was louder than ever before. I had spent years speaking softly, years choosing silence so that others could speak, years swallowing my feelings, because mothers are taught to be the peacemakers, the givers, the ones who hold everything together. But that night, as they sat frozen in shame, my silence spoke for me. It said, "I see you." It said, "I know what you tried to do." It said, "I am not gone. I am here, and you cannot erase me." My son shifted in his chair. His hand twitched toward his glass, but he didn't drink. He just stared at the surface of his food, as if the turkey and potatoes could save him from the weight of his own guilt. He avoided me, avoided my eyes, because he knew that if he looked at me, truly looked at me, he would see the woman who gave him life, the woman he had hurt, the woman who still stood strong before him. My daughter-in-law cleared her throat softly, as if she wanted to say something, but the words never came. She lowered her head further, as though hiding her face could erase the truth. The truth was already in the room. The truth was me. No one dared touch their plates. The steam rising from the food became a ghostly veil between us, and still the silence stretched on. It was awkward. It was suffocating, but it was also powerful, because for once I didn't have to defend myself. I didn't have to argue or beg or explain. All I had to do was sit. And sitting there in my rightful place was the loudest statement I had ever made. I let my eyes sweep slowly across the table. One by one, I took them in. My son, a man now, but still the boy I had rocked to sleep. He couldn't look at me. His guilt was written in the slump of his shoulders. My daughter-in-law, she was shaking slightly, her hands wringing that napkin over and over. She wanted to disappear. My grandchildren, their eyes darted nervously, waiting for someone to break the spell, waiting for an explanation that never came. And then my gaze fell on the empty chair. The chair they thought would stay empty, the chair they had planned to keep free as if it had no meaning. But there I was, sitting tall, sitting firm, reminding them with my presence that a mother does not vanish simply because she is told to. I thought of all the years I had been quiet, the years I had sat in corners, cleaning up plates after they'd gone, accepting scraps of gratitude as if they were enough, the years I had allowed myself to be unseen, because I believed love was enough to carry me. But in that moment, I realized something profound. Being unseen is the cruelest punishment of all, and tonight I had undone it. The silence pressed harder, like a weight on all our chests. I could almost hear their thoughts, whispers of shame, guilt, confusion, but still no one spoke, and so I filled the silence with my strength. I straightened my back. I folded my hands calmly in my lap. I let them see my stillness, my dignity, my unshaken resolve, and I thought to myself, this is the respect I came for, not in words, not in smiles, but in the silence that says, we know what we did, and we cannot escape it. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. The clinking of silverware that usually filled a Christmas dinner never came. The laughter, the jokes, the passing of dishes, all gone. Instead, there was me, a mother, uninvited, unwanted. yet more present than anyone else in the room. Finally, my son shifted again. He ran a hand down his face as though trying to wipe away the shame. But still, he didn't meet my eyes. My daughter-in-law pressed her lips together, swallowed hard, but said nothing. The grandchildren leaned closer to one another, whispering softly, but even their voices were hushed, uncertain, wary. And me? I sat in the storm I had created. A storm not of rage, not of yelling, but of silence so powerful it forced them to feel every ounce of what they had done. I remembered every Christmas before this one, the ones where I had cooked from dawn until dusk, the ones where I had stayed up late wrapping gifts, even when money was tight, the ones where I had smiled, even when I was exhausted. I remembered how I had filled those rooms with warmth, with love, with laughter. And now my very absence had nearly emptied it. And my presence, my uninvited, undeniable presence, had turned it into a mirror, showing them exactly who they were. I did not need to shout. I did not need to scold. I did not even need to speak, because sometimes the most powerful voice is silence. And in that silence, I was louder than ever before. I let my eyes rest on my son once more. He still couldn't look at me. And that told me everything I needed to know. For all the words he had spoken to push me away, now he had none left to bring me back. And that silence, his silence, was my victory. The silence was unbearable. Forks had frozen. Eyes had lowered. My son couldn't look at me. My daughter-in-law's head was bowed in shame. The grandchildren shifted uneasily in their seats, whispering in hushed tones as if they were afraid of waking a ghost. But I was not a ghost. I was their mother. And after a lifetime of swallowing my words, tonight I would speak. I drew in a slow breath, steadying my voice. "Do you know what it feels like," I began softly, "to wait for a phone call that never comes?" No one moved. I let the words sink in before continuing. Every year, I waited for the call, the one that used to come without fail. "Mom, we're excited to see you. Mom, Christmas won't be the same without you. Mom, bring your cookies, bring your smile, bring you." My voice wavered, but I pressed on. This year, that call never came. Instead, I heard words that cut deeper than you will ever know. "We'll celebrate without you." I looked at each of them, their faces still pale, their eyes still cast downward. "It wasn't just Christmas you pushed me out of. It was family. It was belonging. It was love." I paused. The weight of silence was now mine to command, and then I let it break. "You see, I have spent my life in service of this family. I gave up nights of sleep, working 2 jobs so you would never know hunger. I went without shoes so you could walk to school without holes in yours. I skipped meals so you could have seconds. I endured pain in my body so you could have comfort in yours. And not once," my voice cracked, but I did not let it stop me. "Not once did I ask to be thanked. I didn't need a medal. I didn't need applause. All I wanted was to be seen, to be remembered, to be loved." I placed my hands firmly on the table. My voice grew stronger. "But this year, you made me feel like a guest in my own family. You made me feel like a burden, like an afterthought, like someone who no longer mattered." I could see my son shift in his chair, shame creeping across his face. My daughter-in-law's eyes filled with tears, but still she said nothing, and so I spoke the words I had buried for decades. "You think respect is about buying gifts or setting the table or making space on the couch. But respect is not about things. It is about presence. It is about saying, you belong here, you matter here. Without you, this table is not complete." I took another breath, my chest rising with the strength I hadn't felt in years. For so long, I accepted being quiet. I told myself, don't stir trouble. Don't upset them. Don't ask for too much. But tonight I will not be quiet. Tonight you will hear me. My eyes burned with tears, but my voice never wavered. I was not asking for a seat at the table. I was claiming my place. The words hung in the air like thunder. My place as the mother who carried you. My place as the woman who raised you. My place as the one who kept this family alive when everything else tried to tear us apart. That place was not yours to give, and it will never be yours to take away. I looked around the table again. My son still could not meet my eyes. His fork lay abandoned on the plate, forgotten. My daughter-in-law's shoulders shook softly, her tears finally spilling onto the napkin she still clutched. Even the children were still, their wide eyes fixed on me, sensing that this was more than a lecture, more than anger. It was truth. I leaned back slightly, my voice softening, though my words carried more weight than ever. You wanted Christmas without me, but what you didn't understand is that I am Christmas, not the food, not the gifts, not the decorations. Me. I pressed a hand against my chest. I am the hands that cooked, the voice that sang, the heart that carried this family through winters when all we had was each other. And even if you forget me, even if you try to erase me, this family carries my fingerprints everywhere. Tears blurred my vision, but I held my head high. I am not here tonight for your food. I am not here for your gifts. I am not here for your lights. I am here for one thing only: respect. And whether you offer it willingly or not, I will no longer live unseen. The silence thickened once more, but this time it was different. It was not the silence of shame alone. It was the silence of realization, the silence of truth finally spoken. I looked at my son. His eyes, at last, rose to meet mine. There was pain there, guilt carved deep into his face. And though he didn't speak, his silence told me everything. He had heard me. I turned to the daughter-in-law. Her tears fell freely now, her lips trembling as she bowed her head lower, unable to deny the weight of my words. And finally, I let my gaze rest on my grandchildren. Their innocence pierced the tension, their eyes wide and unblinking, as though they had just witnessed something they could never forget. And maybe that was good. Maybe they needed to remember. I sat back in my chair, my heart pounding, my body trembling, but my spirit was steady. For the first time in decades, I had spoken everything I had held back. The pain, the sacrifice, the truth. And I knew, as I looked around that silent, stunned table, that my voice had finally been heard. I whispered the final words, almost to myself, but loud enough for every ear to catch. I was not asking for a seat at the table. I was claiming my place. And with that, I let the silence return. Only this time, it was no longer their silence pressing on me. It was my silence, wrapping around me like armor, because I had spoken, and nothing would ever silence me again. The room was frozen, as if time itself had stopped. No one spoke, no one moved. The clinking of forks, the chatter of children, the rustle of wrapping paper, all of it had disappeared into silence. The only sound left was the echo of my own words, still hanging in the air, refusing to fade. I pushed back my chair slowly. My legs trembled, not from weakness, but from the release of everything I had carried for years. I stood tall, my back straighter than it had been in decades. For the first time in a long time, I felt the weight of my years, not as a burden, but as proof of endurance. I looked at my son one last time. His eyes darted away, unable to face me fully. My daughter-in-law wiped her cheeks, her napkin damp with tears. My grandchildren, wide-eyed, watched every movement as though they were witnessing the ending of a story they would never forget. But I didn't wait for anyone to speak. I didn't need their apologies or explanations. I had already said what needed to be said. My truth had been spoken, and it rang louder than anything they could have answered with. I gathered my things quietly, my coat, my small purse, my dignity, and as I walked toward the door, I held my head high. At the threshold, I paused. I let my eyes sweep across the table, across the family that once forgot me, and I offered them one final gift. My voice was steady, clear, unshakable. They wanted me quiet, but at dessert I served more than sweetness. I served respect. And with that, I stepped out into the night. The cold winter air greeted me like an old friend, sharp but honest. My breath rose in clouds before me, but for the first time in years, it felt light, unchained. I walked away, not as a forgotten mother, not as a discarded guest, but as a woman who had reclaimed her voice, her strength, her place. And though the night was silent in my heart, I knew my story was no longer theirs to erase. It was mine to tell, mine to own, and it had finally been told.